This conference will now be recorded.
Under item number 5. So with that, it looks like all 6 of you are there. Barbara, I'm assuming that you're there as well. I can't quite see you. It says the microphone is not on for the town. Barbara?
I'm here, but I have to turn it off if you want.
Okay. So I guess in the absence of a chairman, I will call the meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. At the Cape Carteret Town Hall. I hope that you all have had an opportunity to review the minutes for the meeting that was held on April the 18th. And I'd ask for a motion to approve those minutes if you're so inclined. Did anyone make a motion, or I cannot hear anyone from the table. Is everybody's microphone turned on? Barbara, can you help them with the microphones? I believe that they can hear me, but I cannot hear anyone other than Barbara.
Can you hear us now?
Is that better?
Can you hear us?
Absolutely, yeah. Loud and clear, thank you.
I motioned and Mike second, Frank.
Okay, is there any discussion on the minutes? If not, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved as presented. Thank you. As you all have certainly learned by now, we have 2 new members on the planning board, and want to just officially welcome new members Laura Nelson and Alex Quintella to the planning board. They were appointed by the board of commissioners at their May meeting. I've had a chance to sit down and talk with both of them in the last week or so, and look forward to working with both of you. I wanted to give each of you just a minute or two to kind of just introduce yourselves and share a little about yourselves and your goals for the planning board, if you would, please.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Laura Nelson. I've lived in Cape Carteret for about 5 years. Before that, I lived in Bogue. And before that, I was in Havelock, Cherry Point. Military brought me to the area. I was an active duty Marine and Cherry Point for about 5 years. And I've been an engineer at NavAir for the last 10. Recently transitioned over to the DOT. I'm an investigator for vehicle defects for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And I'm just trying to get acquainted with the planning board and, learn something new about the town. And, Frank kind of got me oriented a little bit to what's going on. So I'm just kind of like in a learning phase right now. I'm not sure what I can bring to the planning board, but I am very well versed in these kinds of documents just from like a military aircraft perspective. So I know a lot about writing technical data and stuff. So I'm excited to kind of dig in and see what there is going on. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name's Alex Quintella. I have a background in resilience and emergency management. I've been living in North Carolina since 2014. Cape Carteret now for about the past year and a half. So just look forward to working with all of you, serving the people of this community.
Nice.
All right, great. Well, thank you both. And I'm sure that the others share my welcome, and we look forward to working with you all going forward. At this point, we're at item number 5, and it's necessary for the planning board to formally select a chairperson and a vice chairperson. Susan Hall was the previous chairperson. Obviously, she has left the planning board. It is a 1-year term, so the individuals selected tonight would serve until next June, and then they'd have an opportunity to be reappointed by this body if they so desire, if the board so chooses, or they can move on at that time. So with that, I would open it up for any motions to nominate an individual as the chairperson of the planning board.
I'd like to nominate Mike King.
I'll second that.
Okay, are there any other nominations for the chairperson? Okay, I'll close the nominations for the chair, and all those in favor of naming Mike King as the new chair of the planning board, please raise your hand or say
We have
aye.
some discussion there, Frank.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I suppose that would be appropriate, so I apologize. Yes, any discussion?
No,
Willing to serve.
you know, I didn't really have any interest in chairing this board. I did it for 6 years back in the late 90s and early up to 2005. Of course, been a commissioner for a dozen years, and also the code enforcement officer. I would accept this with one caveat, and that caveat would be to change the policy with which we report to the board. And what I would like to do is, rather than the chair report to the board, that we rotate that among the members of the board, so that each person would do it twice a year. That getting me out of attending every meeting. Back when originally was on the planning board, we had 2 meetings. So I had the planning board meeting. We had no help from an administrator or anybody. I had to do virtually everything, and then attend 2 meetings. And sometimes the discussion items were half hour, 45 minutes long, which I was involved. So I think exposing the members that have been appointed by the board to reporting to the board would not only be a good idea, but it would relieve me of the responsibility. And I notice on this thing, I have less than a year to go. So I must have been appointed as a replacement for somebody who had resigned, so I'm finishing out a term. But with those conditions, I'd be okay with serving another time.
Yeah, I think certainly, as you pointed out, your term expires in February. If you chose not to continue or were not appointed, the planning board would just have to identify a new chairperson at that time. If you continue to serve beyond February of 24, the expectation would be for you to serve as chair until next June. And, from my perspective, I actually think that's a good idea to rotate the planning board report among the planning board members. And so certainly no objection to that from the staff. And I cannot imagine any of the elected officials would oppose that. And I guess for that matter, if there's ever a meeting of the Board of Commissioners that you simply can't attend, we're certainly happy to convey your thoughts and recommendations via the staff at that time. So please know that that option is always available to you. Is there any more discussion about the nomination of Member King as the chair? All those in favor of Mike King serving as the chairman, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
You gotta vote for yourself.
All those opposed? All right, so Mike, you are the chairperson. I will turn the rest of the meeting over to you. Something tells me you've maybe had some experience with this in the past, so I would ask you to lead the selection of the vice chair, which really would only serve in your absence at a meeting.
Okay, we need a vice chair. The purpose of this position is to fill in for the chair when they're not there and just execute, run these meetings if I'm not here. I rarely miss a meeting, but is there anybody who would like that position?
You can.
I'll put myself in, but I'm not like hard over on
being the vice chair. If there's another person and they want it and the vote goes their way, I'm happy for it. Might even vote for myself.
Well, thank you. I was going to volunteer, but
Well,
I'll leave it to you.
Could
we
share
oughta-
duties.
We ought to discuss it.
Well, all right, so I saw your hand move, Alex. Would you be interested? I'm just surveying the group here to see where we're at before, and then if somebody wants to make a motion, we can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I'd be interested on the kind of the premise that, I've got a 3-year term. So it's something that if anybody who's coming up is still tussling with whether or not they'd want to continue or they can, or, whatever they need to figure out. There's also an opportunity to kind of, help you out, as you mentioned, given that, you expressed that, and I can totally understand that. So, yeah.
Okay. You want to make a motion?
I have another comment.
Yes.
I actually have less time on the board than Mike. So I'll be exiting a week or two according to the schedule here before him.
Got it.
So that would really kind of be a disadvantage if we were both departing at the same time.
Correct. Yeah.
You want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we nominate Alex as the vice chair.
Have a second?
Second.
Discussion?
I'm okay.
Are there any other nominations? I'll call for a vote. All in favor of Alex serving as the vice chair of the planning board for, that's 1 year, isn't it, Frank, on the vice?
That's correct, yes.
For the next forthcoming year, raise your right hand. Okay, we
Thank
got
you.
5, and he didn't vote for himself, but we got a vice chair.
Okay, congratulations to you both.
Okay, next item is the stormwater management thing that everybody's got it. It's a very involved and difficult. I want to take time to thank Frank for covering it in so much detail. And I still have a good handful of questions regarding this ordinance. So what I like to do is, the way I do it is I start clockwise and go around the board 1 week, and the next week I go the other way, so everybody gets a chance to be first and last. And so, and I realize some of you people are really relatively new to this thing, and this is as complex an issue as we're going to get, at least in my experience, and it is not easy. So I will start with my right, and if you want, Laura, if you want to make comments or questions or
Chairman King?
Yes.
King? If I could, just very briefly, hopefully you saw this in your packets. Just want to really point out there's a couple of summary documents in there that might be helpful for you. One is titled Summary of Changes after the April 18th Planning Board meeting. It has 4 bullet points on it. Those are the changes that were incorporated after your last discussion on April the 18th. So that should identify the specific changes that were made after your last meeting. And the other sheet that might be helpful to you at this stage is there's a 1-page summary of the entire ordinance. And it's a page long. It's got probably, 6 different categories with a few bullets under each category. And that's a really good summary of what the entire ordinance would do. So I thought that might be helpful to you all to boil it down a little bit more. With that, I'll turn it back to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Yeah, I think, well, we'll see how the board members come around, but I have a lot of questions that are probably going to be directed at you. So
Sure.
I expect this to be very interactive and see if we can get to the point where we have a few minor changes from what has been presented to us, or maybe we have to come back in another meeting. I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay, yeah, so this is I think, a good thing, in my opinion, to like revisit these requirements. And like I said, I have a lot of like just years of experience writing requirements for things. So I kind of understand what Frank is getting at here in wanting this to be less subjective. Um, and rewriting it in a way that is clear and concise and means the same thing for everybody that reads it. But for the specifics in here, I haven't had enough time to really like read through this and digest all of the proposed requirements. So that's kind of my position on it, of just, and kind of like some more time though to read through it and understand what the changes are.
Okay. Neil?
Well, I'm basically in the same position as Laura is. It's a lot of reading, and there's a little bit of math involved. But I would like to see if Frank could just give us, a 2-minute kind of briefing on the whole thing and just sort of where we were, where we're going, and what your intentions were with this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Um, as 4 of you know, we discussed this at our March meeting and our April meeting. And initially at the March meeting, I had proposed a certain set of regulations, took the board's feedback from that, made several changes and presented them at the April meeting, took some more feedback at the April meeting and made additional changes that are presented for you tonight. When you look at the strike through underlined version in your packet, there are 2 different colors there, and those reflect the changes that were made as a result of the discussion at the 2 different meetings. The red are the changes from the March 21st meeting. The blue are the changes after the April 18th meeting. So you can see exactly how the ordinance has changed. There's also a clean version included in the packet to hopefully, if it's easier for you to follow it that way. I think essentially, to hit the high points, the current ordinance, in my view, is rather subjective and is in need of some clarity, particularly when it comes to how to handle single family homes. The part that has been most concerning to me, as I've shared with you all before, is that I read it to essentially say that it's up to the UDO administrator or the town manager to decide whether or not a single family home has to put together a stormwater management plan. I'm uncomfortable with that only from the standpoint of I think it creates angst among owners of property and developers of property. It also creates confusion for some of the staff as well as some of the adjacent property owners. And whatever standard you'd like to apply to a single family home, I'm happy to present something like that to you that achieves your goals. I just want us to be crystal clear about what the person has to do or doesn't have to do for everyone's sake, for the staff's sake, for the developer, the property owner's sake, for the adjacent neighbor's sake, just so it's crystal clear. Again, you may take one position that they should have to do very, very significant stormwater improvements, or you may take the opposite position that we really don't need them to do much of anything. And I'm happy to work with y'all on that. As the conversations have evolved since the March meeting, essentially what I've heard the planning board say with regard to single family residential homes is that generally we're happy and we believe that kind of the common sense stormwater management measures would be appropriate for most single family homes. And so essentially what that involves is making sure that existing ditches or swales can continue to function, make sure that that new driveways are slanted back from the street, basically that the property does not dump its stormwater from the private property onto the public street. And the ordinance that's crafted and presented for your consideration tonight essentially implements those common sense measures for single family development. And that'll apply to, I think, the vast, vast majority of the single family development that we'll see in Cape Carteret going forward. It does say that for those that are more significant, and in this case, we've defined that as more than 30% impervious coverage on the lot, Then there is a requirement to store and infiltrate the runoff from the first 1.5-inch rain event. So essentially, it's pretty simple math. You take total impervious coverage, you multiply it by 1.5 inches, you calculate the volume, and essentially what the ordinance says is that it's up to the owner or the contractor or the landscaping contractor to store that volume of water on the property somewhere, whether that's in above surface basins, whether that's subsurface infiltration chambers. It's really up to the applicant to determine that. And as long as they provide the appropriate volume, it's a pretty simple requirement. It's something that I don't think is overly burdensome, does not require a design professional. So that's really the key thing that I think has come out of your discussions over the last couple of months. Is most of the discussion's been focused on how do we treat those single family homes that are built in Cape Carteret in the future. And so if you look at the one-page summary, you can see the fourth grouping down, new construction on individual residential lots. Again, it says it's not required to be designed by a licensed contractor, a licensed professional. Could be a general contractor, could be a landscape contractor, could be the owner, doesn't have to be an engineer. If it's less than 30% impervious, they just have to meet the driveway standards only. The requirement says that they have to tilt it back from the street, and I've included a slope of 4% for the driveway slope back, and I'll explain that in just a second, since y'all had a lot of discussion about that at your last meeting. And then finally, if it says if it's more than 30% impervious, you have to infiltrate the 1.5-inch rainfall event. And you also have to meet the driveway standards, slope the driveway back, kind of more of the common sense stuff. So that's really kind of the key thing, I think, for you to keep in mind. With regard to the slope of the driveway, in most cases in Cape Carteret, there's anywhere from 15 to 20 feet of street right-of-way between the edge of the road surface and the private property line. And so if you divide that in half, so let's say it's 20 foot, 10 foot would be the midpoint. And what the ordinance says is that the driveway has to be sloped back at a 4% grade to the midpoint. Now with a 20 foot land area, that's going to come out to a depth of about 5 inches. If it's a 15 foot width of the street right of way, it's going to come back to about 3.75 inches. So you can do the math on that. The reason that I incorporated 4% grade is because DOT standards call for the street itself to have a slope of 2% from the crown to the edge of the asphalt. They also call for a slope of 8% on the shoulder, basically from the edge of the asphalt to the ditch line. The 2% threshold seemed like it might be a little too little for us, and the 8% threshold seemed like it might be a little too much for us, particularly when you consider that the car is going to have to get up the driveway. You don't want them scraping the driveway and so forth. So this ordinance is written with the 4% standard, essentially takes the middle of the 2 and the 8. It is a 1/2 inch per foot. So again, if you're going back 10 foot, that's 5 inches. If you're going back 10 foot, it's 2.5 inches. Obviously, you can do the math accordingly. As you all know from our previous discussions, there's also language in the proposed ordinance that says if you don't slope the driveway back, you have the option of putting in a driveway grate, for example, and draining the water from the driveway through the driveway grate into a ditch or some sort of infiltration basin. And then also if there are any other creative features that essentially achieve the same thing, we would approve that as well. So that's kind of the main points on the individual residential lots. I wanted to go through that first because that's gotten the most discussion. Very quickly on the other elements of the ordinance, essentially what it says is if you are required to have a state stormwater permit, which in most cases for anything significant, a new commercial center, a new residential subdivision, in most cases a state stormwater permit is going to require it. So our ordinance currently says, and the new ordinance as proposed says, you have to get a state stormwater permit. But what it also says is that you have to secure a permit either for whatever the state requires or the 2-inch rainfall event. And so as we talked about at one of your previous meetings, typically the state stormwater permits are going to require an 1.5-inch storm event In many cases, they require about 3.7 inches, and it gets a little more complicated than that. But the state standard for a project that's not adjacent to ORW, minimum 1.5 inches. Our existing ordinance says 2 inches. So at a previous point in time, the leaders of the town decided that we were going to be more stringent than the state, and they set the town's rules at 2 inches, slightly more than the 1.5, but in many cases in Cape Carteret, still going to be less than the 3.7 that the state might require. So what our ordinance says is if you need a state permit, that's going to govern. If the state says you need a permit for 3.7 inches, that's the requirement. If the state says you need a permit for a 1.5 inch event, our ordinance says, no, you got to bump that up to 2 and we'll accept the state stormwater permit. As I read our ordinances, that is exactly what our ordinance says right now. I think hopefully I've written it a little more clearly in the new version for your consideration. Other than that, there are probably some projects that would not require a state stormwater permit. They're probably going to be pretty rare, but they might be a small commercial project or might be a small residential subdivision. Essentially, what our ordinance says is you have to have a licensed professional, an engineer, design your stormwater system, and you have to accommodate a 2-inch rainfall event. So it's pretty similar to the state requirements. Other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. I hope that summary helps. Again, that 1-page bullet point sheet that essentially has 6 different categories, that's really intended to be the cheat sheet for everybody. So that's the best summary of what's in there now.
So Frank, could I follow up with a question to you on this?
Absolutely.
Okay, there was some discussion about existing neighborhoods that already had an engineered stormwater plan. Did you address
Yes.
that in here?
Yeah, so in the new version of the ordinance, there's very clear language that says if the residential subdivision had a stormwater plan at full build out, then it's not subject to our individual lot requirements. So that was one of the key suggestions from your last meeting that is incorporated in the draft ordinance in your packet tonight.
Thank you.
I had one comment on that exact point, and rather than wait to bring it up later. If you have a development that is planned by an engineer and has calculated in the stormwater retention that has to be put in place, they will do it at what the minimum requirements are for each of the individual lots. That's generally how that works. But once the development is approved, what happens is it may be years before some of the lots are filled out. And I think we need a little bit more language in there that says that the people still can't exceed the minimum requirements for that lot, even though the storm, in other words, if they exceed the coverage requirements, the original design only has for the minimum coverages. If they do that, there needs to be a provision in there to make them increase the requirements on their lot. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So are you saying?
I'm sorry?
Are you? I think what I heard you say is that if the actual construction on the individual lots exceeds the assumptions, I guess, of the original permit, then they would be required to undertake additional measures.
Yes, a statement in there to that effect.
Okay.
What I've heard is people, well, this is the way it is, and there's at the price of the lots that you find, especially down at the shorefront lots down here, people are paying $400, $500, $600, $700 for a lot. Doing a little bit more is just peanuts, and will go a long way in helping us keep these waters here ORW.
So the specific language that incorporates the concern that Neil raised is in section B2 of the proposed ordinance. You'll see it's the last blue language, excuse me, in there. But I think certainly we can incorporate some sort of statement to make that clear.
Yeah.
I'm good. Thank you.
John?
Well, based on what you, Neil, and Ms. Paxson stated at the meeting before, he's highlighted and covered all of that. I don't see anything to amend or add to. I'm pretty good with it.
Okay, since we're talking about B2 in the blue, it seems to me that B2 in the blue is for new subdivisions. Now, Mike is talking about subdivisions that have existed for years.
Yeah, what I meant was if you built one of them, the lots may not be developed out
Right.
for years.
Right. Now, for example, Cape Carteret, old Cape Carteret. I have seen some of these lots that look like they're 90% impervious nowadays, with garages and sheds and driveways and so forth. And I'm as concerned with the existing lots and houses as I am with new subdivisions, even more so, because they don't have any checks and balances, seems to me. And they just keep covering their lots with whatever they wish, with no consequences at all. And this blue is not these plans may, but are not required to accommodate.
What page is that, Paxson?
This is on
Two.
the
Second page.
Okay.
second page in blue,
Under
the
the
red
ordinance
and the blue.
amending.
Right.
Yeah, B2 that Frank just referred to.
So actually, if I could just clarify for you, so in the example that you gave for an existing subdivision in Old Cape Carteret, or really any existing subdivision in the town, all
Right.
of those lots, I take that back, with the exception of Star Hill North, any existing subdivision in the town, those vacant lots, whenever they're developed, are automatically going to be required to meet the standards that we have in this ordinance for individual residential lots.
Yeah,
So
yes, I understand that part.
yeah, that phrase in blue, like would apply in the future. Hypothetically, let's say that someone developed a new 50 lot residential subdivision on one of the few large remaining tracts that are left in the town. And if at that time of development, that plan for stormwater for the subdivision incorporated all of the streets and other common features, and let's say it made an assumption that each individual residential lot would have 4,000 square feet of impervious coverage. If the plan incorporated all that and everything was sized appropriately to manage that volume of stormwater, then they would not be required to do anything at the individual residential lot level. So in terms of the existing subdivisions, if there's a vacant lot in Old Cape Carteret or Star Hill or wherever, they're going to have to meet the standards that we've outlined here in the ordinance for single family residential lots.
Yeah, I didn't explain it very well, I'm sure.
I'm sorry.
I'm not concerned about vacant lots.
Existing lots.
I'm concerned about built upon lots that people keep covering with impervious structures.
Yeah. Well,
That's what I'm concerned about, because I've seen lots in Old Cape Carteret in the 13,500 square foot zone that have a house, a driveway. Oh, let's build a detached garage or shed, they're just covering the areas, and there's nothing that keeps them from it. So why burden the few undeveloped lots and not even pay attention to the dozens and hundreds of existing homes that add impervious? That's what I'm getting at.
I understand.
So actually, that was a big topic of conversation at your previous meeting as well. So there is language in the new ordinance amendment presented to you tonight that says if it's an existing home and whatever additional improvements they might make, whether it's a new driveway or a new garage or whatever the case may be, if that pushes them over that 30% impervious limit, then they have to comply for the new impervious coverage. So for example, if it's a 20,000 square foot lot and they currently have 5,000 square feet of impervious coverage below the 30%, and they add another 2,000 and they get to 7,000, that pushes them over the 30%. They're required to come up with a plan for the new 2,000 square feet. So that is
Right.
incorporated in the ordinance tonight.
Right.
But it
Before,
but it doesn't include the existing home, just the new impervious.
Understood. You're correct. What I perceived from the discussion the last time is that you wanted to focus on just the new impervious area, but certainly at this board's discretion, if you want to apply it to the existing impervious, you can do that. Just understand that that's probably a more significant change. But what I heard you all say was apply it only to the new impervious coverage if it pushes it over the 30%, but we can change that in any way y'all would like.
Well,
Okay. That's a good point. I understand exactly where you are. I think this needs other input from members of this board. What Paxton is saying is rather than just the incremental, okay, being required to meet the ordinance, that if that bumps them over a threshold that doesn't meet the minimum requirements, they've got to, the code enforcement has to enforce the entire lot as if it were a new one.
yes, you certainly don't want to exempt a 1,500 square foot house from the stormwater requirements and just tack on a 200 square foot shed. Oh, well, you have to put a little rain garden in for that. It completely defeats the purpose. And the other thing is the focus, it seems to me, is on new construction and redevelopment without putting any onus on existing homes and additions. So
Okay.
I just think what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Okay,
Just
other
my
people,
point.
yeah, I understand your point, and it's an excellent one. You're holding them to the same standard that you would hold somebody putting a whole new lot.
Yes, sir.
What is that?
Are
Oh,
you,
go ahead.
sorry, are you saying like only if someone is going to add something to their lot? Or are you saying someone who's just not adding anything else, but they're already over the 30%, then they would have to go?
Well, that's an excellent point, and I would say yes to that as well, because we can't just keep covering everything with impervious surface and expect it not to go right into Bogue Sound. Period.
So it's a good point.
Do we have an idea of how many houses?
That's where I was going. It's
Or lots.
what would be then the ramifications, right? Because along those lines, what does that look like in terms of what's currently in the community right now?
Yeah.
How would we figure that
Like
out?
how many people would then have to go like modify?
Right.
Well, I think that would be a great assignment for the new code enforcement officer to come up to.
drive,
Well, it's
measure.
no.
So
Just use a computer and go on the tax parcel.
Neil?
I have a question. So say we find out that, I don't know, let's say 10% of the homes
Yeah.
in the area, in a neighborhood, in one neighborhood,
Yeah.
are over.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, sir, you're gonna have to tear down your garage. That driveway's gotta come up. What do? Do you just say, no, we're gonna build a rain garden, you're gonna enforce a rain garden of some kind on the existing property whenever the person is not increasing their coverage? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a good idea to have all use the same rules. Now, I don't know until we see if there are any violations that exist and how many there are, and to come up with a solution.
That's good. I don't have a lot of interest in going back and finding people that have snuck through, but I certainly believe in going forward, and that is a function of code enforcement.
Yes, sir.
When they get their zoning permit, zoning permit is going to require those people to go down and look at all of the things that are on their driveways and impervious surface coverage and do the calculation. And I think the thing that's really key here is you're saying rather than if somebody is going to add something that requires a permit, okay, they get a permit and when you get the permit, you're going to be able to see the total of the impervious surface coverage. And what you're saying is make the entire lot comply
Yes.
with it, not just the new addition.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Everybody got that?
Yep.
For those go to expand at the point, but not for those who've
Yeah.
already expanded in the past.
Yeah, I don't think you
Yeah.
want
How are you
to
gonna enforce
go under
that?
that rock. Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
they
it's
almost
it's
need to be grandfathered in, maybe, just because of the point that Neil said, where like we would really have to figure out how to go after them.
Sure.
Then,
well, and I think we
like-
would also be creating a burden on the citizens. I mean, I understand the point. It's a point well taken, but I think, you know, what I would also look at the other side of it. These people made their, you know, improvements or additions not either knowing that they couldn't, or they looked at it and said, well, it's not there and it doesn't say that I can't. So did they just go ahead and do it in good faith because they thought that they could, right? So I would look at the other side of that and say, hey, I'm with you, and I think it would be opening a Pandora's box if we were looking back like that. I think that we should just, you know,
But there could be easy solutions, easy, you know, rain gardens, channeling the swale ditches, things of that nature. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about ripping
No,
out
nobody's,
somebody's
no,
driveway.
we wouldn't, that wouldn't
I'm
even
just saying,
be kosher.
and code enforcement is very important. I'm so glad we're having somebody come on board to take a look, and that could be an area of concentration in the future.
You may be a transplant and you bought an existing property, you had no idea that you were not in code.
Of course.
Me.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, so the real point on this thing is regard to change the ordinance is that when people are to existing lots, when people are adding new things, that not just the new thing must meet the stormwater, but the entire
Yes, sir.
lot.
The entire lot
Yes, sir.
comes into play.
And
And
is that something that,
it says that in here, total lot area, total impervious surface that exceeds 30% of the total lot area.
Mhm.
So it's in there.
Which section are you on?
That's B.
so
Before.
just to clarify for you, the way the ordinance is written currently, you only have to store and infiltrate the additional impervious coverage once you get kicked over the 30% for the entire lot. So if you want to change that and you wanted to say you have to store and infiltrate the runoff from all impervious coverage on the lot, that's an easy change that we can make. That's a significant policy question, and that's what you all are there to determine and make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. But the way it's written right now, it's just the new impervious coverage. If you want to change that, we'll just change a couple of words and make it apply to all impervious surface on the site.
well, we're probably not going to end up making a motion because I see a rewrite coming and we're going to have to approve it at a later time, but is just by show of hands, what Paxton has proposed here, which is that if somebody comes and putting something down for that's a permitted, requires a permit, that they have to meet the requirements for the entire lot. How many are supportive of that, or just the incremental?
Can I ask a question? One more question. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, clarification.
That's okay.
Apologize. I feel like I'm the densest one at the table right now.
No, I'm with you. I think I have the same question.
Okay, so let's just say somebody is at that 30% mark right now. So they're okay, right? They're gonna add another 10%, which puts them to 40%. So now we reevaluate the whole lot, they're at 40%. They have to infiltrate the difference between 30 and 40, which is 10. Is that what we're saying here? Because they don't have to infiltrate 30 now. No one does, right? Am I reading that wrong? If less than 30%.
So
That makes sense. You
the
can
draft
have-
ordinance says exactly what Neil just said.
Right.
Okay, so the follow-up is, so really all they're required is 10% because the whole lot has been evaluated. It was evaluated at 30, they're going to 40, so we have to infiltrate that additional 10% to make sure that we're in understanding.
All right, Neil, what if it was 40 to start and they had a
Okay,
new
Yeah.
building?
that's my next point.
Yeah.
If they're already over, like what you're saying, say they're at 50% and they want to add another 10%, evaluate the whole lot, now they're at 60, they got to infiltrate 30 because
Mhm. Yeah.
that's the difference
I think it's
between the
fair.
original 30 number.
Well,
I mean, they have to because they're requesting to add something else.
Yes.
They're grandfathered in if they just leave it alone, but if
Yes.
they're requesting to add something else,
Then you
you
gotta-
gotta buck up
That's
and.
right.
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
That's,
Yeah.
okay.
Could I
I'm
just-
clear.
Again, just to clarify,
Yeah, no,
hold on,
That
let's hear
made
from
things so
Frank.
much straighter in my mind.
Yeah,
Frank?
just so everyone understands consistently and correctly, the version that you have before you tonight, if someone is currently at 40% impervious and they're putting a new garage or something in and they get to 50% impervious, they're only required to store and infiltrate the runoff from whatever is newly proposed. So they would have to deal with that 10%, not with 20% that exceeds 30, the way it's written right now. Now, if you would like to change that in some way, we can certainly make whatever changes you all think are best, but I want to make sure that everybody understands it the way it's written currently.
I think it would be a change if we wanted what the second scenario that you said, where, you know, if they're at 50% now and then they're going to be at 60%, they would have to infiltrate the 30%. I think that would be a change based on what you just said.
That's correct. If that's what the board's wish is, we can change the language to say that.
It would be a change, but either we let people just add and only store the runoff from the additional over 30%, and new construction can't do that. I think two rules for different people are not right. I mean, this is America. We're supposed to.
I think I still may be unclear, but if it's above 30%, they have to infiltrate. If it's below 30%, they don't. Now, currently, if somebody's at 40% and they want to add to it, then they have to do everything above 30%, just like everyone else does, even in new construction.
Yeah, what he's saying is if it was done properly the first time and they added something to put it over, they just have to do the incremental amount.
I understand.
But I think what you're going to find out is when you look into this, you're going to find some people that are over
Oh, yes.
and adding stuff. And that's when I think you need to have them calculate the entire impervious surface coverage.
Mike, could I just build on that?
Surely.
The point that I was going to make, not, just kind of along all these lines, is there's a paragraph in here where it talks about design. And so when I think about all the things that we're talking about right now, you just made the point especially that I think is so important, right? It says, it is important to know that a design professional would not be required for new construction and so on, right? It talks about how, a general contractor, landscaping professional, or the owner would be able to put forward some of these things. I think we might want to revisit that if we're concerned about some of the things we're talking about, because it's like, what's your other mechanism to kind of help some of these things? If we don't want to burden, let's just say as a scenario, we don't want to burden some of the pre-existing stuff. Do we look at design as that control feature and say, okay, wait a minute, you're going to get grandfathered, for example, right? But we're going to say, if you want to do anything moving forward, instead of you not being required to have a design, you are, because we want to make sure that it's not going to injure somebody else or cause any kind of detrimental effects elsewhere. So I'm just curious to get all of your thoughts, but I kind of, listening to the conversation, I think that maybe is something that's reasonable. But again, it kind of all depends on how we land on this one here.
What would you consider a designer?
Yeah, and I think that, Frank, we kind of were talking about this, you and I, when we met in the week, and some of that stuff can get over the top, and I certainly don't want to propose something like that. But in your experience, like, what is something that you would say is an acceptable kind of a quote unquote design if somebody would to bring forward?
Yeah, so I think, in my experience, if you're talking about a single family home, they're relatively simple designs. It's really just simple math to determine the volume of storage, and then it's a matter of routing the water through downspouts or maybe through a swale on the yard to take it to a low spot in the yard. And in many cases, um, for a single family home, the planning board in the two previous meetings, and granted, there's a little bit different makeup to the board now, but what I perceived from the planning board during the previous discussions is that they did not want to burden any single family homeowner with the expense of a professional engineer's plan, which would probably cost anywhere from $500 to $2,000, depending on how significant it is, maybe even a little bit more. So that was a clear policy direction that the board gave, I think at the March meeting. Doesn't mean we can't change that if that's something that's important to you. But generally speaking, your question was, in my experience, what have I seen? I think for single family homes, you really don't need a licensed engineer to design that. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Others may disagree, but that's my take on it.
Um,
Thanks, Frank.
I have disagree, okay? If you're gonna have to put stormwater retention on the lot, okay, for whatever you have to hold, if you don't have somebody who can calculate that, somebody's gonna say, well, I'll take a bulldozer, I'll swell this out, but we have no way of calculating what it is. The other part of it, from a zoning officer's perspective, it said, if you don't want to have to do this, cut down the amount of stuff that you have on there. And that works pretty well. They say, well, I could cut this out. I don't want to go through that. And when you're talking land values and property values of just 3-bedroom single family homes down here in $300,000 and $400,000, you're talking for $500 to $1,000 to have a stormwater engineer calculate what has to be in there so that you can verify. I don't know that that's overly burdensome.
I think you're shy on your costs, Mike.
What would you
The
say?
cost of what? The engineer?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I do.
What do you think it is?
I think it's more like 2,000 to 3,000.
I think it would be more, yeah.
Does that, and I know that number kind of startles some, but I guess where I would say is that something we say is reasonable given the point that you were making, that people are adding, and now we're like, well, we want to make sure this is done correctly so it actually works.
But can it be done correctly, pretty reasonably by the average homeowner?
That's the question, I guess, right?
But
We're trying to
Frank
solve.
said it can be a downspout that routes the water to a low spot in the yard, and I feel like the average homeowner could do that.
And the code enforcement officer is going to have to enforce that, right?
Yes.
So maybe since he's got to enforce it, he's going to know what it is, and he can say, hey, make a 10-foot area, drop it by 2 inches, and you'll be good.
Well, that's what you're going to have to get out of them if you don't
That
have
doesn't
a
sound
design engineer
complicated
doing
either.
that.
Like to physically just implement, it doesn't sound complicated.
So
He's probably going to have several different things that he's just come across that he's very familiar with, that he knows works in the past because he's going to be doing it day in and day out.
Well,
I think that, Alex, you've kind of hit the central policy question. You're trying to find that balance between the public good, the private cost, what's effective.
in my
what's not.
mind, when we look at this, and I know all the variables and stuff, but it just troubles me that we would leave some of those things to doubt. I think we have a responsibility to make sure that this is as good as it can get for the people of this community. And so I'd really like to try to hammer some of that out. I get it, right? I can point a downspout in one direction, but just as well, if a homeowner sees that, hey, there's a pond over there now of water and they want to turn that downspout, they're probably going to do it. And so I look at that and I say to myself, Is that what we want to do? I don't know. So I think,
Well, the code enforcement officer is going to have to enforce that and say, yes, that's proper, or no, that's not.
agreed, but we also have to make sure we have a good code enforcement officer to accomplish that.
I think there are.
I think, you know,
Yeah.
one thing that we talked about in the past, and really for the benefit of the new members, so there's ballpark around 1,600 real property parcels in Cape Carteret right now. About 1,200 of those are already developed. And so an argument that you might hear from developers, for example, or property owners is that, well, the first 1,200 people didn't have to do anything, and there's very few problems out there, and it's not fair to the other 400 people who came along later. Now, you may agree with that argument or disagree, but that's a common argument that we've often heard and will hear.
Not from me. I think, oh, bless you, bless you. I think
No worries.
we all should be mindful of stormwater and protecting folks out. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is protecting the area of environmental concern. So I've never objected to stormwater provisions. I just think everybody should be subject to them, not just the latecomers.
Do we agree we need more time?
I'm sorry?
Do we agree we need more time for this one?
Maybe
Well, I don't think we're going to I want to get through everybody. I've got a handful of things
Okay.
here that I haven't even broached yet. But I think what we need to do is get everybody speaking all the things that they want to do, and then we'll see. And if it has to go back, it has to go back. This is the hardest thing that we've worked on probably since I've been here. I mean, in complexity. Paxton, did you have anything other than that one that you brought up?
that was the main one, but
You got
just,
any minor ones?
well, just for the edification of the board, might it be time, Frank, for you to tell us about our new code enforcement officer?
Well, let's get to that later. Let's finish the subject. Okay. Alex?
I've spoken my piece.
All right. Let me see if I can organize myself. All right, I'll call this one out because this solves a lot of things. We have inside 507, the camera roll 575 feet within ORW waters, which we are, is a 25% requirement, okay, of impervious surface coverage. I'm wondering if there's any interest in making that 25% for the entire town rather than the 30% and 25%.
The planning board can certainly set that number at whatever you'd like. If you would like it to be 25%, that triggers the stormwater plan, you certainly can do that.
Basically, what the 25% is, if you're in 575 feet measured as the crow flies, if any of the area of that property is within that area has to meet the 25% requirement. But we have 25% and we have 30%, and I'm just wondering if there's any interest in just having one, and that being the smaller one, which would put us equal to or with CAMA.
How much area on like a typical size lot are we talking about?
20,000 square foot lot, 25% would be 5,000 square feet of impervious.
So 30% is just a little bit more than that, 6,000 or?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it's overkill. Just like 2% retention is overkill when the rest of the state is 1.5%. Just my opinion.
Well, yeah, and I would confront that with 1.5 inches for the entire state. We are in the most environmentally sensitive place in the whole state.
Vulnerable
I
here.
hear you. I hear you.
So that's, that was something, I don't have a strong opinion either way on 25 or 30%. If we want to leave it there, but 25%, if it was for the entire town, it would simplify everything. Everybody would have to meet the same requirements that people have to meet down in the 575 zone, closest to the water. So I brought that up, and
Mike, you mentioned an acronym earlier, ORW or OWR?
Outstanding resource water. It's designations of the waters outside, and that is the top category that we have for this end of Bogue Sound.
Purest quality.
And yeah, it deals with the quality of the water. But, and the reason I bring this up is in Pettiford Creek and in Bogue Sound, because of the density that we have, there's traces of fecal coliform in the water already. So,
Ducks and geese.
well, yeah,
It's not mine.
just making the point.
Oh, I understand.
And,
And I'm just giving feedback.
okay.
So the ORW has to do with the quality of the water, like the percentages, the micrograms of different pollutants?
However they measure it.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And it is, and that is the best quality for our coastal and estuarine waters. So, it doesn't. Okay, so that was one point. Next one. Okay, that 4% on a 20-foot thing, that comes out to about 6 inches. And I think that's adequate. But here's my question. If you go through the town, if you take the Bayshore community, most of them are culverts, okay? If you go to parts of Old Cape Carteret, a good portion of that is swale. I'm talking on the roadways.
Yep.
I didn't see anything in there that would be compelling. So suppose there's an empty lot in a place where they have culverts, okay? In the culverts, especially down in Bayshore and in Old Cape Carteret, they'll streamline the water running from the center part of the town down towards and they're running through a ditch, or some of it's even just swales, but there's culverts under the driveway that push that water all the way down so that it's absorbing as it goes and eventually ends up in Bogue Sound in one shape or another. Does the zoning officer, if I was in a place with a culvert and I said, well, I want to put a swale there, I think we ought to be consistent with be putting culverts in there if they already exist, or swales if they already exist. And I didn't know that that was addressed in there.
Well, I think the way the ordinance is drafted now, it essentially provides the option. If there's an existing ditch and culvert there, I think the expectation would be that the person would put in some sort of grate to drain the water into a new culvert that's placed under their driveway. But they do have the option really to get it there any way that they can. I mean, essentially what our ordinance says is we don't want you putting it in the street. We want you putting it in the existing right-of-way and the existing drainage features. And so it's purposely crafted to give the person that flexibility. But I think if there's already a ditch, then that's most likely they're going to put a culvert in.
Yeah, what I would like to see is that to be a call of the zoning officer. And here's the typical, suppose everybody has a culvert along this street that drains the water down towards Bogue Sound. Somebody comes in and says, well, I want to put a ditch. Well, their driveway will get standing water in that ditch that won't flow down the rest of the way. So I would like to see it be the zoning officer's call. In other words, if there were culverts, they would require the person to put in a culvert.
Well, Mike, the only purpose of a culvert is to get the water from one side of the ditch of the driveway to the other side.
I understand.
And so yeah.
I don't know the point I'm making, if you have culverts down a street and you give the option to the person to put a swale in there, that swale will stop the flow of the water to a certain depth, the height of their driveway, okay? And you'll have standing water alongside the road. And all I'm saying is if it's a swale, continue with the swale, but give that call to the zoning officer, not the individual person.
Are these communities that have homeowners associations that would have involvement in that?
No.
No? Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, if I live in a neighborhood and everybody's got a culvert, you put a culvert in.
And
If you live in a neighborhood swell,
I
do a
understand,
swell.
but that's not specified. They're
Yeah,
given an
it's not.
option in this new ordinance, and I'm saying let the zoning officer dictate, because if there's swales, there's no sense, which indicates a shallow ditch.
Yeah.
Okay, where you've culverts, it's a deeper ditch. But somebody may, with this thing, say, I'm going to put a swale with this culvert, and that's going to stop flow of water.
I think practically speaking, the ordinance as drafted will accomplish what you're seeking, but we can certainly clarify that it's at the zoning officer's discretion.
Yes. I had that exact thing happen to me, and that is a zoning officer. When they want to put a swale in, I required a culvert to move the water. Okay. We talked that. There's no mention of the 25% CAMA requirement in our ordinance. 575 feet from outstanding resource water. Is that something that should be in there, Frank? Just so people know and are aware of it?
Well, I think, anybody that falls within the CAMA jurisdiction is going to need to get a CAMA permit or an exemption anyway. So I think that's clearly going to govern. But essentially what the requirement is if you're adjacent to ORW, which is just about all of Bogue Sound, you cannot exceed 25% impervious regardless. No matter how bang up of a job you do on the stormwater management, you're limited to 25%. So we can include that in there, but I think it's going to be covered by CAMA. Now, if you want to change the threshold for our ordinance to be 25%, kind of under the same theory as CAMA, we certainly can do that too.
I don't necessarily want to change it. I just want, be upfront that it's a requirement, and and just reading our ordinance, they're not going to see that. Okay, but they do have to get a CAMA permit, so that's where.
The other thing that the board, Mike, you may know this, and Paxton may know this, perhaps others will as well, but there are some state stormwater permits that are considered to be low density permits. And so, for example, they often don't require any stormwater management measures at all for a significant new development, provided that the total project stays less than either 12% impervious or 24% impervious. So that's another regulation that's going to come into play in Cape Carteret as well. And the state rules honestly are pretty confusing. So I was purposely trying to keep ours as straightforward as possible.
I think that wherever the requirements of either CAMA or the town ordinance require a retention pond, that it be calculated by an engineer. I just don't know that a homeowner or a guy on a bulldozer can do that.
So our ordinance as drafted would require a licensed engineer for anything that's going to get into the retention pond level, any commercial development, any residential subdivision, any multifamily development that might occur. That exemption or that allowance for the owner or the contractor to design the system is only for a typical single family home. And I don't think you're going to get into a retention pond scenario with something like that.
Well,
Do we need, for the purposes of the UDO, to define design?
what's that?
Do we need to actually place a definition around the word design? What design is? I realize that, right? Like I get that, but I'm just wondering, Frank, if we talked about getting back at the crux of this kind of central question, is that something you can carve out a bit more, maybe?
In terms of defining what the actual design is?
Well, what exactly is design? Because design as I continue to kind of hear the conversation and just think about how it reads, I want to say it's vague, but it could be carved out a bit more.
Well, let me state this for everybody, just so that you have the proper perspective. the state regulations almost never apply to a single family home. So please start with that as just a baseline understanding. Everything that goes through the state process has got to be designed by a licensed professional.
Right.
But it's important to know that the state doesn't get into single family homes except in rare circumstances in terms of a stormwater management system. And so many communities also don't impose any stormwater requirements on single family homes. So Cape Carteret would be one of the few communities that actually does impose those regulations on single family homes. There are a few others in the coastal areas. Emerald Isle has for many years. Some of the other local communities do. But the fact that you all are imposing stormwater management requirements on a single family home is a little bit unique. And it basically reflects, I think, a higher priority on stormwater management in a place like this. And so that's kind of the first judgment there. And then the second judgment is, would you require a licensed professional to do it, or would you trust the homeowner or the general contractor or the landscaper? So, and it's really, as I said, it's the central question from a policy standpoint is exactly where do you want to strike that balance? And so your job is to basically meld all that together and figure that out. I don't know that there's a great necessity to define design. I mean, I think the implication is it's, the design, the development of a plan for how you're going to treat the stormwater on your particular property. So, but I wanted you to have that perspective because the requirements that you all might adopt are going to be better than most places. There's certainly communities that are better than this in terms, if that's your goal. But this is already a pretty significant step for the town.
Yeah.
I would want like a quote, like we're not even sure how much it is on a homeowner.
You mean
is
like
it
somebody coming in?
$5,000? Is it
No.
$500? I would want like some more information really before I would say like you're just trying to put in a $1,000 piece of driveway for your boat, and now you got to go spend $5,000 to have like a design for your 10% extra water runoff. It just seems overkill. So I just kind of want like a quote to find out what amount of money are we even talking about?
A quote of what?
Oh, no, the engineer or like
Of the
whoever.
engineer and the
Oh.
plan and all that.
Oh,
Design.
Yeah,
Well,
the design.
So we've had those conversations with engineers, and as you might imagine, it is very site specific and very specific to the development that you're proposing. In something really simple, it's probably $1,000 or less. In something that's more involved, it could easily be $2,000, $3,000. It really depends on the complexity of what's going on for that particular homeowner. In addition to the fact now that, quite frankly, engineers are very busy and very backed up. And so they can obviously command a higher price when demand is high. But I think you can safely assume it's at least somewhere in the $1,000 range, and that it's $2,000, $3,000, perhaps a little bit more. I've talked with some of the local engineers here, and there's not any one number I can give you that will answer that question. But and that's just the design. That's not the component, the materials that someone may use, or the grading, or the labor, or whatever the case may be.
well, the whole idea behind this is to, it comes back to what Paxton was saying, when people overbuild and keep overbuilding, and you got to put that someplace, well, how much you want to hold? And I just don't know that the local contractors that build that or the people there would be able to do that unless if it was just, maybe we just leave it to the discretion of the zoning officer, whether he wants a engineer's permit, engineer to certify it, or the homeowner.
Yeah, I would suggest to you, though, I would not support that. That's actually the key reason I'm bringing this forward for the planning board's consideration is I don't want that decision on that expense to be left with the zoning officer. I want us to be clear and set clear expectations for people about what's required. I'm really trying to remove any subjectivity from the ordinance.
Makes sense.
Good idea.
Well, then it comes down to whether or not, and we're talking basically individual lots, and our subdivisions are already out there where somebody wants to build something, they go over the requirements of whether or not we're going to have an engineer specify this dished out area is adequate.
Correct.
You know, I'll tell you what, you need the input since you're going to put this together for us, Frank. So how many would support having if they exceed the requirements and have to hold stormwater on the property, okay, that an engineer certify it or not?
As of now, I do.
All for it? Okay. Did you
Again,
see that, Frank?
yeah.
It looked like
You got
two people.
all against it. All against it. Okay.
Okay.
So on that particular item, where you got an individual homeowner, we're not going to require by 4-2 an engineer to certify an individual homeowner's retention pond.
Design.
Understood.
So, like for future discussion, what Frank doesn't want is for there to be subjectivity to it.
Right.
So you could say if it gets to a certain complexity, like 80%, or I don't know what the cutoff is, right? Of how are you even going to manage water if you're 80% or 90%
You're not.
covered? Right, you're not.
You're not.
That point.
So I don't know if there's like a cutoff of complexity that you could mandate. Once you reach this level, you need to have an engineer. You know, if you're just 10% over, I feel like you can manage 10%.
That's why
pretty
I said
easily.
have it be the zoning officer's call to whether or not an engineer should require that. But
So I think that practically speaking, the only projects that you will see that might have even approach 70 or 80% impervious would be a commercial project or maybe a multifamily housing complex. And the way the ordinance is written, those absolutely require a licensed engineer.
Because
I
they're
think
over a
it's-
certain complexity, so you have to have like the engineer.
I disagree with that. You go over here in the 13.5 district, and I bet you there is numerous houses that are over.
Well, we've also had quite a bit of folks show up to our meetings in the past and talk about the issues that they deal with as well. So I think that can't be understated either. We do have, it's not unprecedented to say we have stormwater issues in this community. It's just not. Anything, other than to say it that way would just not be true. So I think there have been plenty of folks who have come into commissioners' meetings, into these meetings, and have voiced those concerns. So yeah, I'm kind of there with you, Mike. I think, again, I'm on the fence about it right now, but if I had to lean one way, I'm more, you do need an engineer.
Okay, well, we covered that one. Let's see. I'm trying to find stuff that we haven't really beat to death. That's done. Frank, there's something, this is a comment from the CAMA. It says if a project is located on the shoreline of an ORW, you may build only 25% of the area in the AEC, and you may not use stormwater collection devices to gain buildable area. Can you
That's
comment
correct.
on that? Pardon?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. I mean, if you're adjacent to ORW, you're limited to 25% impervious coverage, and they don't necessarily want stormwater control measures there.
Okay. So that covers essentially the 575 covers usually every lot that is on the waterfront or on a canal, plus well across the street, and sometimes the lot across the street. If you try to draw that 575 line around the waterway.
Yeah, and so in any circumstance, any state requirement is going to trump whatever we come up with here locally. So if the camera rules are more stringent, the person will absolutely be held to that. Again, the bulk of our ordinance is really intended to apply to those ones that might fall through the cracks when it comes to the state per se.
Okay. All right. Next question I had is we have probably more culverts than anything else in the town. I mapped out the entire town wherever we had culverts. Who bears the responsibility? The ordinance requires that the homeowner put it in town property. Okay, essentially, who is responsible for maintaining that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think practically speaking, it's a joint effort between the private property owner and the town. At the end of the day, it's in the public right of way, and we are responsible for maintaining the public right of way.
Okay, so.
But I would certainly encourage any property owner to make sure theirs is flowing properly, and many do.
Yes, but you don't feel that needs any more action than we got right now? Because there's a lot of culverts that are about half filled up, where people haven't done anything with them, especially down in Bayshore, where they would have like a 12-inch pipe and there's only 3 inches at the top and it's all filled up with dirt.
Are they going to kick that back to us because Frank just said it's a right of way?
Well, again,
I don't know whether it needs stressing or not.
No, I'm just saying, honestly, like, would the homeowner say, like, hey, you know, this is a right of way. Like, what do you want me to do? Is that where you're going with it? Kind of like clarifying that some more?
Well, I didn't know whether it needed clarification or not, because some of them that are filled in, it may not be a problem area, okay? It may not be where they have frequent flooding, but in a place where you had flooding, where it stops the flow from going down the entire line, because basically what you have is the entire ditch is a reservoir during while the storm is going on, and if you block it up here, it goes out onto the road.
Yep.
So that was just an observation in looking at every culvert in the town.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as you've heard me say before, I mean, ultimately, when you're setting policy, you're balancing the legal issues, you're balancing the practical issues, you're balancing the financial issues, you're balancing the political issues to come up with the best policy for the entire community. And so I would just encourage all of us, all of you, all of the elected officials, consider all of those. Now, practically speaking, let's just say that we required every property owner to go out there and clean their culvert, and there's roughly 1,200 properties or so. Some don't have culverts, etc. We can do that. We can take that step, and we can come out very aggressively to require that. The question I would ask of you is that practical? Is that going to be effective in the long run? In a perfect world, we all want that, right? But what about the 80-year-old husband and wife who live there, who are on a fixed income and don't necessarily have the resources or the energy or the physical ability to do that, right? So that's when it ultimately becomes a matter of the town adequately maintaining the public infrastructure in the town. And obviously to do that, we have to have the right resources for that. We have to have the right equipment, the right personnel, etc. So again, it's all part of the puzzle. So I would just encourage you to think about those things.
How much is it for the town to go around and clean out the culverts after a hurricane?
And how would that be accomplished? You can't do it with men and shovels. It has to be watched out.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, and you've got a perfect example of it occurring right now. You know, I mean, the town is in the process of spending, we've allocated almost $900,000 of public money for stormwater improvements in various parts of town in problem areas identified by the Board of Commissioners. And so, you know, ultimately it comes down to prioritizing, you know, what areas you're going to direct the resources to. You're absolutely going to need to maybe have somebody jet out some of the culverts, right? There are some culverts that you may jet them out and they may collapse, and then there's an expense to replace the culvert. We're getting ready to do a stormwater project down on Bogue Sound Drive that's nearing the end of design work right now, And as part of that project with public funds, so that we can ensure that the ditches and the culverts function properly, we're going to replace some of those culverts. Some of them probably been there 50, 60 years, right? So, it ultimately is that big balancing act, and that's ultimately what the elected officials and that's what the staff has to figure out. So,
Okay, that sounds to me, leave it well enough alone. The way it's been done. The people willingly cut the grass in the right of way, but the cleaning of the culverts is something that would just leave it the way that it's been. From what you said, it's an issue, but not that much of an issue.
yeah, I mean, it's absolutely an issue when you have a big storm and it doesn't work, and everyone points the finger at what they believe the reason for the problem is, because that's human nature, and I'm sure you all have experienced that before. But I'm not saying we can't require people to clean out their own culverts. We could probably adopt an ordinance to that effect. I'm just encouraging you to consider the practical and the financial implications associated with that as well. It's a bigger equation, and on the surface, everyone would say, yeah, you need to clean it out. No question at all. But the issues get a little deeper than that. And I'm just trying to encourage you to think about those things. But if you want us to write an ordinance that says everybody's got to clean out their culvert, and if they don't, we're going to go around and fine them or accomplish it some other way, we can absolutely do that.
Speaking of that, I will be in touch with you tomorrow for both Sound Drive easements. There are no recorded ditches where you're planning to put your ditch. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Well, all the improvements on Bogue Sound Drive are going in the street right away.
No, not the big ditch between Briggs and Manatee. There's no recorded ditch there.
I think it's considered waters of the state, but I'm happy to talk to you about it. The assumption is it's already public waters. So if it's not, then obviously we'll
the
adjust.
ditch. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on this stormwater? Frank, have you got what you need? The significant points you made?
The four comments that I heard, that I'm not sure if there was consensus from the planning board, but I believe that there was. One was to require for a residential subdivision that has a subdivision-wide master stormwater management plan that makes assumptions about the individual homes, that if they exceed those assumptions, then the individual lot requirements would apply. I heard that comment. The other comment that I heard is that for existing development, if someone exceeds the 30% threshold, that they are required to store and infiltrate the runoff generated from everything on that lot. But then I also heard some discussion about whether or not it was just the new impervious coverage. So it is written currently to say just the new impervious coverage. So I'm not quite sure where you all ended up on that, so that would be helpful. I heard a suggestion for a 25% trigger as opposed to 30%. Mike, you seemed interested in that. I wasn't sure what the rest of the board's wish was on that. And then the last thing that I took a note on was for the actual driveway solution, where we've listed those options, that it's ultimately at the direction of the zoning officer as opposed to a choice for the property owner. And I'm comfortable with that because we've given them multiple options to comply. So those are the four things that I heard. One thing that didn't come up tonight that has come up in the past is whether or not we want it to be 2 inches and exceed the state requirement, or whether we want it to be 1.5 inches. I think at the end of the April 18th meeting, you all kind of punted that decision for maybe the last decision before you make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. And the way this is written is if it's a commercial project or an institutional project, or if it's a new residential subdivision or multifamily, it's a 2-inch requirement. And if it's a single family home, it's a 1.5-inch requirement. And again, just as a reminder, the 2 inches is what's in there currently for those commercial, institutional, major residential projects.
Maybe we can clear that one up. That's one of the things I forgot, that was the 2 inches. I had the 30 and 25%, but the 2 inches and the 1.5. We some years ago adopted the 2 inches, which is above the 1.5 inches requirement. It's been in the ordinance. Why don't we just go ahead? Is there interest in keeping it at 2 inches?
Why go
For
backwards?
commercial and multifamily and so forth.
2
And-
inches.
It's already.
2 inches, right.
Mhm.
Is that?
But we're talking
is that what
single
we're
family.
talking
And
about, Frank?
single family residential. Just-
And
I
single
think
family,
everyone
right?
would
You
be
know,
2
keep it
inches.
all
Yeah.
at 2 inches.
Yeah.
So under the town's, the current UDO requires 2 inches for commercial, institutional, residential subdivisions. It does not require anything for individual single-family lots. That's the current UDO. The proposed draft that you have in your packet tonight keeps it at 2 inches for the commercial, institutional, major residential subdivisions, and implements the 1.5 inch for the individual single-family homes. And
So
if
it's
you're
saying
comfortable,
you want to have 2 inches for the individual resident. In other words, the undeveloped lots in existing subdivisions.
1.5.
1.5.
That-
That's
But
the
do
way
we
it's
want
written.
it to be 2, or do you want to remain it at 1.5? That's the question.
Yes.
Yes.
1.5.
1.5.
Come back to me in a moment.
I mean, that's the state requirement, right?
I'm
1.5.
I'm leaning more too. Again, I will go back to, not to keep grasping at these straws, but I will go into all the stories of all these people who have walked in here time and time again. And I just think that we're vulnerable. So I think 2 inches is probably the way that I do.
I support the 2 inches also.
But there is no provision for existing homeowners to do anything about their egregious stormwater leaving their property now.
Well,
No,
but I think we're working towards that.
Yeah.
I think we're working towards
I
that.
mean, we could start with 1.5. There's nothing saying it has to stay in stone forever. If it's not working, if the 1.5 isn't working, then you could bump it to
It's
2, right?
1.5
Later.
more than we have now, right?
It's a fair point. It's a
Well-
fair point. But
we're trying to get
Yeah.
some regulation and control over individual lots from the very thing you brought up when everybody puts this shed up and that shed up.
we've got
It's
growth
all
coming
full.
like right now.
Oh,
So that's the thing, right? Like, I hear you.
Yeah.
You're spot
1.5
on.
is the state requirement too.
You know, the state goes from here to
As an
Asheville,
average.
okay? And the most vulnerable part is right here. And that's why I have felt that 2 inches, and I'll tell you, just from the experience as a zoning officer, when I had that thing and people would come in with fairly complex projects, I would work with them and sit down and talk about this thing. And you could put these things and give them options, and they would come back with something that was better if you worked with them. And I didn't feel like it. I don't know, but it's just.
What is the requirement in Rhode Isle? You said they're one of the few coastal towns that has a requirement.
so Emerald Isle for single-family homes, and it's all single-family homes, all new development, not existing, all new development, single-family homes. It's a 2 inch requirement, and it can be, up until just recently, it could be designed by the owner or the general contractor or a landscape contractor. Emerald Isle, I think earlier this year or within the last year, changed that requirement to a licensed professional. So you have to have an engineer, and they've made that judgment that they don't think that cost burden is unreasonable for their property owners. That's something
but-
that's.
It is more complex over there.
But you might mention also in Emerald Isle, you say it's all single family. I completely disagree. You have duplexes with the same zoning as single family. There's no differentiation between a duplex and a single family home.
Yeah, that's correct. Their single-family zoning districts also allow duplexes by right.
Yes, throughout the town.
But is that more of a reason to do 2 inches?
No, I'm just saying they have bigger structures.
I follow you. I follow you.
So-
Yeah.
Getting back to the point, I'm trying to get a consensus to make it
Yeah,
easier for Frank.
exactly.
And two of us was it 4 to 2 for 1.5 inches? You know, whether we require
I'm at
any,
2.
I'm at 2.
I'm at 2.
2, I'm
And
at
I'm
2.
at 1.5.
1.5.
Oh, oh, this is not
I
good.
mean, why go back and address it later when you can put it in now and be done with it?
So why are you
So-
1.5?
Because that's what the state average requirement is.
Yeah.
But we are not average
Correct.
compared to the rest of the state.
We're only talking about single
We
family.
got a lot of water
That's
around
right,
us.
But we're not
Yeah.
talking about the ORW, we're talking about the whole rest of the town. And I would hate to be overruled by the commissioners.
Yeah.
So let me make, again, whatever you decide is fine. I just want to make sure that I'm clearly conveying the current requirements. So the state rules currently, their stormwater rules, it's 0 inches for the state rules. Now, for the projects that are significant enough to qualify for the state rules, in many cases, it's 1.5 inch requirement. In some cases, it comes out to about 3.7. But if you are building a single family home right now and on an existing lot, you're below, well, in some cases, you could be any impervious coverage. You don't have to do anything for the state. There's no requirement for stormwater.
I'm still at 2.
I'm mostly
still
in
at
favor
2.
of the 1.5, but it's just because I don't want to overly burden these single family homeowners when there really is no requirement at all right now. Why overkill it with 2? I'd kind of rather see how the 1.5 just works. Although I hear you when you say there's a lot of new development, but aren't we like 80% developed already? I mean, they're
75.
75, so.
But you're talking about some big tracts that will require stormwater
Yeah.
remaining.
So they'll already
Yeah,
be
no, that may be
covered.
covered
Yeah.
Yeah,
as an
yeah.
engineered subdivision.
Yes, sir, it will be
And,
in our ordinances.
I'm just talking, you know, when the people come in and, you know, the point that you made, Paxton, about people coming and it's like encroaching a little bit at a time. You see this stuff.
Yeah.
What you need is a zoning officer that addresses that. And then when they hit the threshold where they have to do something, this is what you got to do.
Yes.
And
I think
Well-
they'll get that with the 1.5 or the 2,
I
though.
think so.
Yeah.
But I think when we have our zoning enforcement officer, I'd be interested
Bless you.
to know how many single-family residential lots exist for future development at this point, as opposed to big tracts, which we know are going to have stormwater permits, which we know are going to have state regs.
That's covering the majority.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's 50 acres in the tract.
I can get you the exact number, but it's somewhere between 350 and 400 vacant residential lots. But I'll get you the exact number. But just
That
put it
many.
in context.
I'm very
350.
surprised.
According to the land use plan, now assuming the land use plan is correct, it's in that 350 to 400 range.
As a total of how many?
About 1,600.
Yeah.
So the town's about 75% built out in terms of the number of parcels.
Yeah. Oh, I already said
Stalemate.
1.5. I think we're at a,
Stalemate.
yeah. And,
How do you break a tie this
Yeah.
outfit?
We leave it up to the commissioner.
Good luck.
Yeah.
yeah,
We need to have
that,
a flat number.
normally, if this wasn't something that would affect our entire ordinance, Paxton wouldn't vote on it, but it affects the ordinance for the entire
Sure.
town,
Of course it
so
does.
that you would vote on it. And 6 is hard to divide when you got 3 and 3. It's,
I don't want to
Well-
belittle. I don't want to belittle the concerns on either side. I would just submit to you, whatever you decide, I think you'll be fine. Whether you pick 1.5 or 2, we'll implement it. We'll do the best we can. And if it needs to be changed in the future, we'll change it. I don't know that it's worth spending too much time on either way.
Well, and the other thing, if it was all one number, 1.5 or 2, which it isn't, okay, it would be easier. You wouldn't have to explain why not to some person, if it was all one. But
Well, I go back and comment
I-
that you said earlier, Paxton,
I can
about
live with it either way.
why shouldn't everybody be held to the same standard? We're making a statement earlier in reference to.
Well, Mike's talking about ORW. The whole town is not ORW.
No. We're talking about single
Yeah.
residential
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm saying
Yeah,
apply the ORW standard to the rest of the undeveloped lots in the town.
I understand you're saying that. I think that's overkill. Overkill. Yeah, when we were on such sandy soil at Star Hill that, it's just, we can play when Brandywine's underwater.
Yeah, I know.
It's just night and day. Yeah, oh dear.
Sand.
Table it and come back to it.
Well,
Well, he's got to write it up.
Frank, we'll have to
Shut
address
it down.
that at the next time and make a decision one way or the other. Maybe somebody will change their mind, maybe a different input, but it's not that big a deal to me. But 1.5 to 2 is 25% more, of the part that they have to treat.
Right.
Okay. So did I hear, is the entire planning board comfortable with changing the threshold for single family lots from 30% to 25% impervious?
No, sir.
No.
No.
No, sir.
Oh, okay. All right. Understood. I just want to make sure. And then for the development on a single family lot that does exceed, if it's an existing developed lot, and when it exceeds 30% with whatever new development, additional development on the lot, do you want to require them to store and infiltrate the runoff from the entire site, existing plus new, or just the new? Because the way it's written right now, it's just the new.
For the entire site is what we said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Existing.
The reason I'm for that, because I saw it in the time I was in there, is this incremental doing of stuff.
Yeah.
I said, well, I can't get this done tonight, so I'll get this permit and then I'll come back.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think
All
so.
right, so I will absolutely write it that way, that it's all impervious coverage on the site if they exceed the 30% threshold. So the 3 changes that I have from you all, just to make sure everyone's clear. One is if there's an entire subdivision stormwater plan that assumes full build out, if the actual build out exceeds what was included in the original permit, they'll have to undertake additional actions to deal with the actual build out. The second one is that if it's existing development and they cross the 30% threshold, they have to store and infiltrate the runoff from all impervious surface on site. And then the third change I have is with regard to the particular driveway measure, it's at the zoning officer's discretion, whether that's slanting the driveway back or installing a culvert or a grate or some other feature to keep the water off the street. Those are the 3 changes that I will make for the next version and bring that back to you.
It's allergic.
I heard you say something on the second one that I don't know if it was what we proposed. You said that they would have to infiltrate the entire site. We just want the entire site evaluated and the excess above 30% infiltrated.
That's what he meant.
Okay. Gotcha. Are you,
Okay. Actually, I don't want to be difficult, but I meant all impervious coverage on the site. You're saying you only want to store and infiltrate the amount greater than 30%.
Yeah.
that's what everybody else is held to, correct? All the other properties?
Well, yeah, because if you have 30% coverage, you're good. You don't need to do anything
Right.
with that runoff from that 30% coverage. And then if you get to 40%, you do need to do something with you can still have the 30%
10%.
runoff, but you just need to do something with the extra runoff.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
so
I'll be overruled on that.
No.
let me clarify this for you. So let's say that the existing development is 25% impervious and you add 3%. You don't have to do anything. let's say that the existing development is 29% and you add 11%. Do you have to handle the additional 11% or only additional 10%?
10.
10.
10. Anything, so 30% below, you've basically got a waiver, so to speak. Anything that exceeds 30%, you have to come up with a plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the 30% was allowed. You're allowed to have 30% covered and not do anything with the water runoff.
Okay. All right. Thank you for
Everybody
that
gets that
clarification.
allowance.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So I will make those 3 changes
It's on your
and
mind.
I will bring that
It's
back
on
to
your
you
mind.
at your
We've
next
been here
meeting.
long enough, might as well.
I know.
Let's decide if we're gonna have a meeting next month or the month after.
We have any
Yes.
other, anything else on the stormwater?
No, I will make those changes and bring it back to you for discussion at your next meeting.
And we'll revisit the 1.5 versus 2
Absolutely.
at that time.
Could I make a recommendation?
Yeah.
So looking at item number 7 here, it talks about the next meeting. Given some of the points that we need time, some of the things we've talked about tonight, maybe it's a good idea to come back in August, unless you think it's better to just hash this out sooner. I'm just kind of looking at the time component for us to kind of,
Well, if,
Geez, I'll be available.
it's up to Frank, July, you're talking the July meeting?
Yeah, so the reason I pose that question to you is that I will not be in town on July 18th or that entire week. So my request to the planning board is to either A, meet on the 18th without me, B, just simply push back to the August 15th date, or C, you could pick another date.
August, I think is.
Yeah.
August.
Yeah, August.
August.
Okay, fair enough. We'll schedule the next meeting for August the 15th then. Thank
We
you.
want you here, Frank.
All right.
Yeah.
You're an integral part of this board.
Okay, I gotta find my agenda paper. I got so much here.
Chairman King, one
Yeah.
thing that I neglected to do when I was serving as the chairman, I did not call for public comment, and so I apologize for that. And from my vantage point, I could see a few elected officials, and I saw Jennifer was the only person in the audience. I don't think she's there anymore. I apologize for skipping past that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Okay, are we gonna meet in July? I have a couple items I wanted to add to the list that are unrelated to what we've done tonight. We will have a meeting on July 18th
August.
and August for the stormwater. Okay,
Oh, I thought we were having the meeting and all.
Yes.
Yeah, because
Meeting
Frank
in
won't be
we're having a
here.
meeting in August.
Yeah.
But he's not gonna be here for
July.
July.
Right.
Do we want to have a meeting? It wouldn't be stormwater.
Like a workshop, you mean?
Well, what I said, I had a couple other items I want to add to the agenda, but we can do them in
Well,
August.
just tell us what they are.
Well, let's get through this and I'll tell you what they are, okay? We'll come back to the next planning board meeting. Frank, you got any comments other than,
Yeah, the only other comment I wanted to share with you, and Paxton had alluded to it earlier, I'm pleased to announce that we have hired a woman by the name of Julie Shambaugh to fill the town planner code enforcement position. Julie begins work on July the 10th with the town, and she will handle anything and everything development related, code enforcement related, zoning, stormwater, etc. And eventually I hope to have her responsible for CAMA permits in the town also. So really excited to have Julie come on board. She is a experienced professional, has worked for more than 35 years in state, local, and federal government. She also actually served as the town administrator of Swansboro in the late 1980s. She spent the bulk of her career working for Camp Lejeune in the Department of Defense. And I think she has a really broad base of knowledge to bring and share with the group, as well as just a pleasant demeanor and a helpful demeanor, which is important to me in dealing with our customers. So that's part of the reason, too. I didn't want to throw Julie into your first meeting on July 18th and say, hey, Julie, I'm not coming. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you deferring to August 15th. So I look forward to introducing Julie T at your next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Frank. The item was, there is the only thing you can put in unpermitted in the right of way is a mailbox. Some of these mailboxes are going up with concrete and brick structures in there. We have a 60-foot right of way, and you take a boat with a trailer on the back of it coming down there, and I feel like that's an accident waiting to happen.
Yep.
To crash into them. You knock over a 4x4 post and nothing really happens to anybody or anything except the post in the mailbox. So I want to see whether or not we want to address that in the ordinance, so we can do that in August. And I've forgotten the other one, Paxton.
Well, was it house numbers? Because we really need to get on people
Well,
to display house numbers.
I'll send an email out to each of you for potential planning board
Okay.
items.
Okay.
And we'll get them on there and try to get it organized
Yeah.
so that we have
Yeah.
reasonable amount of time to work each of them.
Yeah, emergency services, you drive in some neighborhoods and you don't know what the numbers are.
Well, that's already a requirement. It's
I know,
just,
I know.
it's not enforced.
Yep.
Okay, last item, additional planning board member comments. That would be the new people. I think we covered that in the beginning. We get a little history of the new people that are here. So I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor? Okay. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Frank.
I know this has been a lot of work, but I think we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, thank you all.
Frank, thanks for making the effort. Hope you get well soon.
Yeah, thank you. Y'all be well.
Well, I got to go watch my alma mater play baseball.